Well, there's Scott Spann here from my sailboat office in Sausalito, California. This is one in a series of short videos I'm doing for leaders exploring a concept I'm calling effortless leadership. And you're going to hear me say this time and again. I don't consider effortless leadership to be some idealistic state. I consider it to be extremely practical and pragmatic for a couple of reasons. One, we can't keep working harder and harder and expecting better and better results. It's not working and it's not sustainable. And if you're working with what it means to be fully human, and if you're working with what it means to be in a system, there are principles and practices and processes that can be deployed that make leadership relatively effortless. I've experienced it as a leader. My clients have experienced it in their leadership roles, so I'm going to share some ideas with you that hopefully makes this easier for you. This particular one is some work I did with a venture capital firm who asked me to come in as a CEO and take an enterprise that they were funding and begin to move it out into the market. So before I took it out into the market, I said, well, let's take a good hard look at the business model you all are investing in. So we sat down inside of this startup, and I've got a question mark here because I wasn't yet convinced that this was really a viable business opportunity. They had a tremendous insight, and the insight was that it's theoretically possible to do a better job of matching buyers, sellers, and inventory in this turbulent zone. So let me explain a little bit about this turbulent zone concept. There's an ideal curve, this green line, in which in the early days when you're not well known, your price is low, and then as demand rises, your price rises and eventually peaks, and then you've had your time in the market and you begin to fall off, but it's a gradual fall off and then it tails off into a commodity kind of a process of pricing. The way it works in the real world, however, is that yes, it starts out low, you get some adoption, you get some traction, you begin to raise your prices now up to what full value is, and then you tend to hit a wall. And when you hit that wall, it drops off very, very steeply. And there creates market turbulence here between where the pricing structure could be and where the pricing structure actually is. And this creates a lot of dead inventory in warehouses, on store shelves, and then reclaiming that inventory and then reabsorbing that inventory, accounting for that inventory. It's a huge headache for OEMs and for retailers. So this business model was designed to fix that. And so the goal of this was to reduce retail market waste for perishable manufactured goods to zero. Now, by the way, this little bitty map was a compilation of the thoughts of the people in the venture capital firm that wanted to launch this kind of a business. And so I had interviewed them and then made up this very, very simplified model to say, is this your fundamental business model? And let's see if we can give this thing a go. So I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I'll just give you enough of it to give you the flavor for it. So if you're going to reduce that waste to zero, there are these 5 components you have to have. Thinking about it systemically. The first one is you've got to have timely access to the inventory. You've got to be able to get a hold of it, and you got to know about it and those things. Then you have to have timely access to the markets so that you can do that matching over here of the inventory, the sellers, and the buyers across that optimal pricing curve. And then you have to have some sort of a medium to be able to cause that conversation, to do that matching, and then you got to be able to fulfill that. And I'm not going to go any deeper than that, but you can see from these different arrows that different parts of the system enable other parts of the system, so you better be really strong on the front end if you're going to be strong as you move through this thing. So that was the rough business model. Okay, that's good. Then we said, okay, well, what's the ecosystem we're deploying this business model into? And so that ecosystem is made up of primarily of these 5 big players: OEMs, consumers, retailers, auctioneers, and fulfillers. And that's all I'm going to say right now. But what was important about that is if you're going to deploy it in this ecosystem, then you better be able to satisfy the needs of those different players in that ecosystem. And that was the intent here, was to satisfy their needs. Well, if you're going to satisfy their needs, then for each of those parties, you better understand their goal and their problem. So we sat down and thought long and hard, and then we went and validated this, and I'll show you that in a minute. But we thought long and hard about what we thought the goal for each of these different stakeholder sort of positions were and what the biggest problems there were. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. If you look at the OEM, they're looking for a branded stability and ability to match technology with user needs and abilities. So if they get behind on user needs, well, then they're not going to make it go. If they get ahead of user abilities, then they're not going to make a go of it. And the biggest problem with that is still is a huge proliferation of solutions, competitors, changing user needs as they evolve and as their worlds evolve. And user learning is a challenge, because it's just a challenge. You can probably get that one figured out yourself. I'll jump down to satisfying consumers. The goal of most consumers, on the other hand, is they want just-in-time, lowest cost customization. That's challenging sometimes if you're at the OEM end of the equation. The problem that they're having is finding, selecting, installing, and learning this new device, this new software, this new sound system, whatever it might be. So that was the ecosystem. Well, then we went out and did some research interviews in the ecosystem with folks like IBM, Harman Kardon, Best Buy, Office Max, those kind of folks, to just test out both our business model and our understanding of the ecosystem players. And we discovered a competitor in the process of doing that. And so we modified our interviews to understand the satisfaction of those different representatives of those stakeholders relative to the business model and to their ability to satisfy those different stakeholders. So we took our own basic business model and we were able to do a relatively rigorous assessment about how well was our competitor able to execute on the business model. And you'll see here the overall average. I won't take you into the nitty-gritty of it, but the overall average was they were about an 8.5 on this, and they had a running start on us in terms of relationships and the development of their own back office and infrastructure and stuff like that. So that was our first warning sign. And then also through the process of doing the interviews, we asked how well was this competitor satisfying the different stakeholders in the system. And as you can see, their overall ranking was pretty high. They were at a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. So I had to go back to the VC and tell them that, our competitor meets and exceeds our expectations for a good service offering in the space. And if you want to invest in this, well, then you should structure it as an adjunct to them, but not as a head-to-head competitive offering. So I basically fired myself that day. The good news was, because of the way we'd done the analysis and the amount of money they expected, that they anticipated that we had saved them by not having them, because this other company, by the way, was in stealth mode. That's the one thing I didn't share with you. We'd saved them a ton of money. If we had spent 6 to 12 months in stealth mode before we popped out on the other end, they would have ended up sinking in quite a bit of cash into the business, and then they would have been crushed once they hit market when the stealth company came out of stealth. So that's this session. The lessons from this are, first of all, what's the structure of your business model? I don't care whether you model it as a system. I recommend that, but somehow clarify and get clear about the structure of your business model, and then get clear about the ecosystem and the health of your ecosystem relative to the business model you're offering, and then look at the fitness of your business model with that ecosystem. Are you actually better able to satisfy a goal or solve a problem in that space? But you want to really rigorously articulate those goals and those problems, and then confirm that in any kind of research work that you're doing inside that market space. So that's it for this one. If you're watching this anywhere other than scottspann.com, head on over there, leave me a comment, give me a like, give me a share, unlike it, but let me know what you didn't like. Let me know what your own complex problem is. And if you find this useful and want to hear more of this, feel free to subscribe. In the meantime, I sincerely hope this finds you thriving today. Take good care. Bye-bye.